Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to MindShifters Radio with your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce, and his wife, Jeanie. Michael and Jeanie share with you the wisdom of the ancient Aramaic internal process of forgiveness. They offer tools and support 5 days a week. They will support you in building a solid foundation within yourself to live in pure love. In Aramaic, Rachma. Michael is the author of So Why Is This Happening to Me Again? For more information on Michael and Jeanie, please visit www.whyagain.com. And now your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce. To the brightness within you and the truth that is rooted within me.
Hi, and welcome to MindShifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce. And I'm kind of in a noisy place here, so I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking today, but I want to welcome everybody. Our call-in number is 646-200-4169. And today is Memorial Day 150. It's hard to believe that it's been 150 days since we've been doing this, but it's fantastic. Michael, Dr. Tim is already on the line, so I've got him turned on, and I'm going to go mute unless someone else calls in.
Hello. Are you there?
Michael, we can hear.
I am here, sir.
Oh, there you are.
The old mute button trick. What can I say? Welcome, Dr. Tim. Welcome, everybody, to the show.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
How did the support group go last night?
It was kind of big.
Awesome. Tell me about it.
We had a whole slew of people that normally show up who didn't show up, and we still had 13 people. We had
awesome
5 newbies, 3 that came. It was their absolute first time, and 2 that had been there once before. The 3 that came, and that was their first time, they were coming because of the talk a week ago on Sunday. And we did the second half of Empowered to Heal. And we have a couple very Christian people. They identify themselves as being Christian in the group. So there were a couple groans and not so subtle reactions during the talk, because if you'll remember when you did that talk, you talked quite a bit about people getting the message wrong, about all it takes to be saved is to just say a word or have a belief, and you don't have to have any actions. And so it got a few people going. That didn't really come out in the discussion because I kept a lid on it for the group, announcing that if you're new here, please just listen and get in the flow, and then in the next time or two you come, feel free to participate more once you understand the core of what we're doing. And so the discussion went well, and then we had somebody who worked through a really good, not super powerful, but a really good solid worksheet on his college-age son, who isn't exactly doing what Dad thinks he should be doing. And so Dad's reaction to it has been less than loving. So it was a really good group, and with 13 people in the room, there was plenty of energy and plenty of questions, and so it was very nice. Lots of stuff bubbling up.
Say again?
Lots of stuff bubbling up for people.
Cool. Well, it's interesting how many people have no interest whatsoever in the actual teachings of Yeshua, that they think that the Greeks said it all. In fact, about 15 years ago, I was in Lansing, Michigan, and I spoke for a Kiwanis club, and there was a minister there who had been a preacher for 50 years, and it was a 2-story building we were in, and I was at the top of the stairs, and he was at the bottom of the stairs speaking to the fellow who had invited me. And the fellow invited me. He said, you guys are doing some similar work. And he was like, no, that guy's got nothing to do with what I'm doing. And I overheard this conversation, so I went to him, and personally introduce myself and invite him to lunch. And so when we sat down to lunch, the first time, of course, I always speak of the Aramaic. I spoke of the Aramaic, and he stopped me right mid-sentence. It's like, and he literally said these words, "I don't care what Jesus said." I learned all I needed to learn from the Greek translations. I thought, well, okay. But, the thought I propose to people is how many times over just something simple, something everyday, simple issue, have you been speaking to someone who was with a person who spoke another language? Maybe both of those people spoke French or German or Italian or whatever. And they were trying to explain something, express something to you that they had experienced. And they couldn't quite find the words, so they turned to their friend and said, well, how do you say that in English? And their friend said, you can't say that in English. There are so many things that it takes literally a full paragraph to say in English that Yeshua said in Aramaic, and the Greeks put it into one word that bears little or no resemblance to what was actually said, what it was actually pointing us toward, and it's like the meaning. There's even the movies made about it, Lost in Translation. When I talk about translations, and it's a while since we talked about this on the show, so we'll bring it up, but I like to tell a story about, imagine that, we're doing a workshop series, and we get a fellow who is, let's say, Russian, that hears about this workshop happening, let's say this series I'm doing in Greensboro this week, and there just so happens to be a member of the church here, someone who is the best translator of Russian into English and English into Russian in the world. And he invites this fellow, houses him, brings him to the workshops. We get together a couple of times as a whole group, and he's really fun. We really have a great time together. And when he's getting ready to take this fellow back to the airport after our week of workshops, I turn to him and I say, would you tell our new Russian friend that I think he's really cool? And he turns to me in his best Russian and says, Michael thinks you've got a low body temperature. Now, he translated my words perfectly, but he didn't say a word about what I meant. So much of the Greek translation, great translators, they translated the words perfectly, but the Aramaic language, few people realize, is an idiomatic language. When I said he's really cool, I used an idiom. You can't translate an idiom. I don't care how good a translator you are. You've just got to know what the idiom means. And the idiomatic meaning of so many things are lost that much of it actually becomes ridiculous. In the name of love, we're going to live in fear. There's nowhere in the Aramaic scriptures that it says anything about fear of God. There's just no such idea. That's just a total, complete misnomer. In fact, there are places where you hear the Creator saying, do not fear me. You hear Yeshua saying over and over again, fear not, fear not, fear not. And yet so many people are terrorized by Greek gods. And, it's just an interesting process to watch. And the reason is because the people who've been trained through that fear are trained through fear. And they have fear of, oh, my God, if I question, if I change something, if I actually entertain that there might be a deeper or a different meaning to this, I'll go to hell. What a fear trip. What a way to terrorize people. I mean, that's some of the original terrorism on planet Earth. I remember working with a family down in, they were in Alabama, and they had a 12-year-old son who was going to church, and he was asking questions. He wasn't, doing anything but asking questions. And his preacher went to the parents and spoke to the parents about this kid who, he wasn't just swallowing everything hook, line, and sinker. He was actually thinking and asking questions. They ended up taking this boy to a psychiatrist, and they did electroshock on him because he was asking questions in church. How bizarre in the name of love is that? So I certainly understand, Tim, that type of situation, and people are terrified. And my input, and I think I said this yesterday, it's interesting that this topic comes up again today, but anything that is taught through fear is a fraud. It is not true, because fear in the human mind is an indicator that the mind is corrupted. It's using corrupt data. And so what we want to do is get back on track and actually be in harmony with the laws that Yeshua spoke about. And laws are interesting. Laws are not something to be obeyed. Law in Aramaic is something that happens. If somebody steps off a cliff, the law of gravity takes over. The law of gravity has not been disobeyed. It has absolutely been obeyed. And gravity happens. That person's body's going to drop and bones are going to break at the bottom of the 2,000-foot cliff. It's just the way the law works. Well, there's a law that said love. First law was love. And it's not something to be obeyed. It happens. And when we keep the condition of love in our minds, instead of hostility or fear, we don't speak out of a store of words based in hostility or fear. We don't create out of a store of words based in hostility or fear, which sadly, unfortunately, and supposedly in the name of Yeshua, many, many, many preachers do all kinds of words, actions, voice tones based in hostility and fear. And of course, not that we haven't all done it, but ultimately to follow a dogma that's based in someone who's in terror and who's terrorizing others, my offering is just off base. It's just not correct. So we're looking to get back to the truth of his words in Aramaic and the truth of his teaching in Aramaic. And sounds like it was an exciting evening last night.
It was, and we're encouraging people to not believe what we're saying. We're encouraging them to look at it for themselves, ask questions, and see how it actually works in their lives. There's a book I haven't read too much of it yet, but it's for the upcoming Christian Science Fellowship book club I moderate. It's called Love Wins by Rob Bell. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't, but it sounds on track.
It's pretty much on track so far. He's talking about how so many people are raised in families and cultures and religions that don't want questions. Some communities don't permit open, honest inquiry about the things that matter most. Lots of people have voiced a concern, expressed a doubt, or raised a question, only to be told by their family, church, and friends or tribe that we don't discuss those things here. And he says, I believe the discussion itself is divine. Abraham does his best to bargain with God. Most of the book of Job consists of arguments by Job and his friends about the deepest questions of human suffering. God is practically on trial in the poems of Lamentations, and Jesus responds to almost every question he's asked with a question. He says, what do you think? How do you read it? And he asks again and again and again. So we do encourage people to ask and to see how it actually works in their own lives. And that's how I start the group, and I try to end the group, saying these are practical tools, and we encourage you to pick them up, try them in your own life, and if they work, use them more, and if they don't, go find something else that does, because you're meant to be living from a space of love. And no matter how much we get into some discussions in the group, or we spend our time here on the radio or the internet show talking about how it works and why we do what we do, the real benefit is when we pick up the tool and actually apply it to myself to remove some form of hostility or fear, and then my life gets better and my relationships get better. So, extend the invitation. Start your own group, call us on the phone, raise a question, make a comment. It only gets better once you start asking the questions and actually moving to a place where you can experience yourself as being connected to the source of love.
Yeah, and the truth is that the questions are really where the key is. The solution is not in the answers. The solution's in the question. Because the minute we bring the right question forward, there's a power in us that will bring us precisely the answer that we need. And until the last question is answered, we can't move forward. And, of course, people are given pre-programmed, pre-packaged, dogmas. We've got, over 500 sects, so-called, of Christianity. very few of them have much to do with Christianity. They mouth, they say lots of words, but they still go out and kill people. It's like, in what universe does that make sense? In the name of someone who said, love those who hate you, do good to those who despitefully use you. It's time for us to wake up. It's time for us to wake up to who we are. And who are we really? Hold a newborn child and you know exactly what a human life is, and that's who you are. And that's what needs to happen in your life, is to have that experience. And that experience doesn't come from dogma, doctrine, prepackaged answers. It comes from an honest inquiry and one who honestly, truly does their own work and has the experience of the conscious, continuous, active presence of love in their physiology and in their lives. And where we don't have that, which, of course, we're all in the boat of there are places where we don't have that, fine, then there's our work. That's our next piece of work to do. And we're here to invite and inspire people to do their work, the work of forgiveness. And by the way, Jeanie mentioned the Memorial Day, the honoring of Memorial Day. And if you have been with us before, the whole idea of honoring Memorial Day, our request of you is that you face one thing in you that's based in some form of hostility or fear. Today and every day, just pick one thing, even the smallest little irritation, and do some forgiveness work around it. And as you do that forgiveness work, become released from the insanity of the lack of the active presence of love. I worked with a gentleman last night who was having a challenge with his 30-year-old son. This man's probably about 52 or 53, and he wants to get close to his son. But when he was a young man, he was very staid and, standoffish and lived in a world of, quite a bit of stress. And so didn't have much connection, didn't have much communication with his son. And so his worksheet questions were about, how do I get my son to talk to me more and communicate? So we went through the process. And it's like, if you cancel this goal for your son to communicate, what do you find? And that's where he discovered that he never communicated, never modeled communicating with his son. It's all an inside job. And our idea of honoring Memorial Day is that when we all do the inside job, the reason for the outside expression of hostility and fear, that is war, will disappear from planet Earth. And that's one of our projects, is to disappear the whole process of war and replace it with the active presence of love, human life, and the peace that comes from that process, the serenity that comes from that process. So, Jeanie, is David with us by chance? Do we have any questions in the chat room? Anybody on the phone?
David is with us, and he is turned on. And there's several people in the chat room. Some of them, one Jana that we met last night in class, so she's on the phone. She says, I'm captivated by these new thoughts. I've read Why Is This Happening to Me Again up to the first 6 chapters as of last Saturday. And now, after only a couple of contacts with Michael, I went back to reread it, and it's a whole different book. So,
brain cells.
New insights. Yeah, brain cells. So, but there's no questions out there right now, and nobody has their hand up in the switchboard.
Cool. Well, I had a conversation with David, and he was sharing with me some of the work that he was doing this morning in his worksheets. And it opened some interesting ideas. And so, David, are you with us?
I am with you, Michael.
Would you like to share some of our conversation this morning and how the conversation came about for you? And let's look at where we ended up with it.
Well, what we were talking about, what I was referring to, was I was doing some worksheets, and I increased my agreement to do a minimum of 5 worksheets a day in relation to my former wife. And what I was recognizing and seeing in the forgiveness process is that one of my goals was for, and it was unconscious, for her to forgive me. And though that I've been doing this work and looking at this and teaching and training it, it just became to my consciousness of, wow, I have a goal. I've been holding a goal about her forgiving me. And we were referring to that that's a pretty common goal that's been trained to ask forgiveness from other people. For then, if I can get their forgiveness, then it's like approval, or it's acceptance, or it's an expression of love. And though that on an intellectual level, I understand that they can't forgive me for anything, it is about me really taking a look at and canceling those goals for someone that I have, for someone to forgive me. And I was reminded of... Pardon me?
I hear you.
And what I was reminded of is that it's an automatic process, an unconscious process, until I do enough worksheets, build enough brain cells, get enough information where I can, okay, let go of that. And I was thinking about Dr. Tim there in the talk that he gave at Unity several months ago, which can be listened to, which I was talking about. One of the reasons of being forgiven was to avoid the punishment. And at an unconscious level, there's a lot of it that's out there, because that's what the culture is geared around. It's about, okay, for true forgiveness, there must be an element of punishment in this. For someone to commit, quote, a crime or to do something, then part of the forgiveness process is to be punished. And if there is, and not only that, is that if I'm holding that in my carbon-based memory, then if other people won't punish me, then I'll find ways in order to punish myself through depriving of myself of the love and or feelings of success or anything that's associated with the feeling of love. So that was a nice little piece for me to get, and I'm driving now, so I'm about ready to I'm about to reach a point where I can stop driving. So if you want to make some comments, I'll listen, and then I'll find a place to be still.
Cool, fabulous. Well, what the conversation with you, David, with these insights that you were getting clarified for me was, and I'd never really thought about it before, what are we really asking somebody to do when we say, I want you to forgive me? And what we're saying to someone really is, I want you to stop blaming me. And what are we really asking for when we say to somebody, I want you to love me? What we're really saying is, I want you to approve of me. And, Karl Marx is reputed to have said, if you want to destroy a culture, change the meaning of its words. You look at our whole culture and you look at the importance of just those two words, love and forgiveness, and how those two words have been distorted and destroyed in their original meaning. So when I say to somebody, I want you to love me, what I'm really saying is I want you to approve of me. And the truth is nobody can love you, and you can't love anyone, because love isn't a verb. It's not something we do to each other. It's the stuff we're made of. Hold a newborn child and you know what love is. And the whole idea of the work of Yeshua and all of the masters down through the ages has been to restore people to their original essence, the active presence of love. And when I say to somebody, I want you to forgive me, what I'm doing is I have an internal blame system going on where I've bought into the blame you lay on me. And it's really projection to say to somebody, I want you to stop blaming me. That is, I want you to forgive me. And what it really points to is whatever it is that we want to be forgiven for, quote unquote, forgiven, what we really need to be about doing, what that really points to is I need to go inside of me and remove this program in myself of this reality of guilt and blame, of self-guilt and blame. And once I do that, then someone who blames me will be irrelevant. Their blame will be, just another reality. Oh, I see you have a reality of blame. Okay. And what is it you've been blaming yourself for? What is it you don't want to take responsibility for? You'll no longer be hooked into that game with them. Now, of course, it's nice when people will let go of their blame toward you. But letting go of their blame toward you has not removed the blame from their minds. Them letting go of their blame toward you does not remove your own self-inflicted guilt from your mind. But when we actually engage in forgiveness, we remove the blame, we remove the guilt, we remove the fear. Literally, those realities, those energetic patterns are removed from the total physiological structure. And when that happens, when we're no longer identifying ourselves as some false identity based in blame, guilt, fear, and self-rejection, then releasing those realities leaves us to the experience of who we are, and that is the active presence of love. And that's when absolutely everything changes. When instead of firing in brain cells is content based in hostility or fear that keeps you locked into your hostility and fear, when you collapse those things, all that's left is your human life. All that's left is the active presence of love, the stuff you're really made of. And that's what we're looking to support people in doing. So often the teachings have been taken and made external, and the whole teaching was internal. It makes me think of the Muslim faith. And in the Muslim faith, there's this jihad, and people talk about jihad as, we need to go out and kill the infidels. In the original teachings in the Muslim faith, jihad was the level of commitment required to go inside yourself and remove the parts of you that were in infidelity. It was all an inside job. And so Yeshua's teaching was an inside job, and what we're looking to do is to do that internal process and that internal work. Dr. Tim, does that give you any thoughts to chew on?
Well, listening, I thought we've got a couple people in the chat room who are relatively new, so I think it's important to define reality. Most of us have been taught that reality is this permanent thing outside of us, and all we do is open our eyes and we accurately perceive reality. And your work is based on the realization that perception is a very active process, and we only see what we want to see, and we only hear what we want to hear. And we can look at a scene that 5 other people are looking at and walk away and have experienced almost nothing similar to what the other 5 people or other 4 people have experienced. So in this work, your definition for reality is the experience created in my mind by my choice of actively selecting out a very small percentage of what's going on around me and creating my experience out of that. And you make the distinction that there is a world around me, and that we call actuality. It's what's actually there. But what I hear and what I see and what I come to believe and what I remember is a tiny, tiny fraction of what's actually happening. And then I walk away from that situation conditioned by my culture to believe I know all there is to know. I've seen all I need to see. I've heard all I need to hear. I know what's going on. I'm right. You're wrong. It's settled. So why argue? So I would think a little bit more clarity about the distinction between the realities and the actualities would help some of the newer listeners.
Well, I think you've just done an awesome job of giving us that distinction. You're right on track. I agree with you. And one of the other things to be aware of about reality, and anytime you question the fact that whether somebody is actually experiencing what's going on, the actuality or the reality, just go sit in a courtroom for a day or two. Watch the 6 different people who testify about an accident, and you'll wonder if any two of them were at the same accident. None of them is experiencing the same reality. A certain event happens in a room. Let's say it's an event that most people would classify as negative. Somebody has a reality of rage. Somebody has a reality of fear. Somebody has a reality of, oh, I better shut up or I'm in trouble. The mind generates all sorts of realities. And another interesting facet of reality generation is that this so-called mind is continuously updating according to current goals. So when you remember something, you remember it. The brain cells fire based upon the goal that's currently active. And so when a particular goal is active, one has a very accurate recall of what happened 5 years ago. And if 10 minutes later a totally different goal is active, they'll tell a different story about that very same thing. I can't tell you how many times when you, and I'm sure you can verify this from your experience with clients, Tim, is when someone comes up with the reality that you absolutely in spades prove to them is not true. They will put that reality away, and they will come up with a totally different reality for that situation. They'll start out and they'll say, well, I did that because Charlie, pulled the watch out of his pocket. And so I walk over to Charlie and I say, Charlie, would you empty your pockets? And there's no watch in his pocket. This person will totally forget that the reason they went into their rage, let's say it's something that's deep unconsciousness, they'll totally forget that a moment ago they said they did that because Charlie pulled his watch out of his pocket. And they'll change their story absolutely, totally, completely. And the story might be, well, the reason I did that really was because Mary came in the room. And then when I proved to them that, Mary really didn't come in the room, people will just go, I've seen people do 10 different stories, 10 different completely. I don't mean just slight modifications. I mean completely different realities about why they did such and such a thing. And when they do that, they have no awareness that they've changed their reality, that they've changed their story. They think they're still living in truth. And, of course, the idea of this work is to learn to collapse reality, to collapse the output of your mind so that you come back to a direct experience of who you are. You are not any reality that's ever happened in your mind. You are not any image of whatever has happened in your mind. You are not the body that happens in your mind. And you're not the person who has the judgments, who has the faults, who has the blames, who has the guilt, who has the fears. You are, and this can be a shocker for new people, you are the absolute active presence of love. You are an awesome being called love. And when you get that, it just makes all the difference in the world. There's a film that we recommend people watch, and you can buy it on eBay. Actually, eBay didn't have it. I had to do some searching, but there is a DVD of it available. Somebody's actually bootlegged DVDs of it. The movie is called Saved by the Light, and it's about this guy who's a hired government killer. True story. He's hit by lightning, and in his near-life experience, that is, his body clinically dies. They almost take him to the morgue. He has the experience of traveling into a dimension or a level where it's absolutely a space of love, this awesome space. And when he's told he has to go back, they're resuscitating his body, he's like, no, I don't want to leave here. I want to stay here. And I've heard Daniel, his name's Daniel Brinkley, I've heard Daniel say more than once, hey, anytime I'm ready to go because that's such an awesome place to be. But this guy who's, and the film shows, and I really acknowledge Daniel for allowing to be a film that showed how mean he was. I mean, he was a mean SOB throughout all of his life until this near-life experience where he clinically died. And the two things he comes back with, the two things you hear him talk about all the time if you're in his presence, is you are a powerful spiritual being, and love makes the difference. Now, a mind that's programmed through multi-generations of rage, of fear, of grief, of pain, of terror, of hatred, of vengeance, of all the things this work culture tries to teach you, oftentimes does not have in any way, shape, or form in memory what it is to be the active presence of love. And here's this fellow, Daniel Brinkley, and instead of going around the world killing people after he has this near-life experience, and he has to struggle with it because his body's mind, his carbon-based memory, what the scriptures call the mind of man, is still trying to give him stories about, negativity and attack and all that sort of thing. So he still struggles. I know he said, last time I saw him was a couple of years ago, and we've been on platforms together over the years, and he said, I still struggle with that stuff. But what he does now is he goes around to VA facilities, being a former military person, and he holds the hands of dying vets and supports them in remembering who they are as beings of love instead of the terror that they've had forced into them through their training and through the behaviors they've had to do in order to survive or in order to obey the higher-ups in the hierarchy. He gives them the direct experience of who they are. Imagine if our family systems today, instead of dad going to work to struggle to make money, to make ends meet so you can have all the toys, dad lived a life of connectedness and love, and when the kids came home, was there with warm, loving, open arms to hold his children returning from the world. Or maybe he wouldn't even send them out into the world. I know when I travel, oftentimes we'll be in cold climates, and it's 7:30 or 7 o'clock on Monday morning, and here's this little 6-year-old kid, looks like a little frozen bird, standing out in the rain or the ice and the snow, waiting for a school bus. He's been put out of his home in order to go somewhere to be filled with information by someone who very possibly is going out and getting drunk tonight and going to bed with 3 or 4 different people. And it appalls me when I see these little kids standing out there. So what if Dad were someone who stayed right there with those kids and taught them about who they were as the active presence of love? Yesterday I shared a quote from St. Teresa of Avila, and I found one other quote I'd like to share with you about what it's like when one does the work that it takes to have a direct experience of their human lives. And I'd like to read St. Teresa of Avila's quote once again, and then I'd like to read one from Paramahansa Yogananda, and he describes the result, which for the average person in the culture that is run by hostility and fear is unimaginable. But here's what St. Teresa says. She says, the soul feels such a sweet and wonderful delight that almost everything falls away. It falls into a kind of swoon. The breathing and all bodily functions gradually subside. All exterior strength is lost, and the soul's strength increases so they can more thoroughly enjoy the bliss. Folks, if you've never had an experience of bliss, you haven't had an experience of a human life yet. You're living as a non-human. St. Teresa goes on to say, union and rapture or elevation are what they call flight of the spirit or transport. These are all different names for the same thing, which is also called ecstasy. Be with that thought for just a minute. If you live in the standard culture, you kick the cat, you rage at the kids, you scream at your spouse, you got a boss that is less than a loving relationship. Imagine that you walk through the room with the cat, the kids, the spouse, and the boss, and you're experiencing what St. Teresa is describing here. That would mean that you were experiencing the cat, the kids, the boss, the spouse as a human being, rather than as a reality called a non-human that is an existent, non-being self that only functions through your head. What would that be like? And then Paramahansa Yogananda also has an awesome description of what that human life experience is like. And he says this: when the profound ecstasy of God falls over you, the body becomes absolutely still. The breath ceases to flow. By the way, we call that still point. One of our workshops that we do is called still point breathing, and it's to reach that state. He says, the breath ceases to flow, and the thoughts are quiet, banished, every one, by the magic command of the soul. When you drink of the Creator's bliss and experience an intoxication of joy that not 1,000 draughts of wine could give you, when you can feel your presence in all creation and also know the joy that is beyond creation, then you are a godlike being. You are in every blade of grass and on every mountaintop, and you can feel every cell of your body in every atom of space. Einstein says to us that if we think we're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, we're living in an optical delusion. We think we're these separate little bodies, these separate little shells that have to protect ourselves from, if we live in a fear-based world, we have to protect ourselves from our spouses, from our friends, from our enemies, from everything, from the insects, from the environment. And if one lives in that kind of fear, no wonder there's no ecstasy in that life. You
Michael?
are designed for ecstasy. Yes, sir. Go for it.
We have some comments going in the chat room about what's the true nature of reality and how do you know. We're talking about objectivity is how we see, and being objective is how we stay here on this physical planet in physicality. Another one says, I'm struggling with this, different realities. What is real? How do we function if this is true? And then another person says Jeanie tells them that tonight you're doing What is the World from A Course in Miracles, which is a real good way to get some of these questions addressed. But then someone said, I have issues where I experience something that someone physically does in front of me, and then they say they didn't do it, that they physically didn't take that action. And someone else echoes, yeah, I've had that many times myself. So the question is, how do you tell that it's real? So,
well, here would be my input, Tim. First of all, when you say, with reality, how do you function? Excuse me. 99% of people in our culture are dysfunctional. They're not functioning. They are not functioning as human beings. When you bring the active presence of love, now that sounds so far out if you live in a world of hostility and fear that's based in perceptual realities that have been going on in your bloodline for 1,000 years. If you live in that world, everything I'm saying sounds insane. But if you'll remember, in the ancient teachings, they said, seek ye first this kingdom, that is the kingdom of love. Seek first, and this isn't a religious idea. It's just when you live out of your true human beingness, you have a totally different experience than the realities that the culture have put in front of you. Okay, so somebody does something in front of me that my mind says is really terrible, and they deny it. So if they do something that's really terrible and they deny it, so what? What business is that of mine? If I'm functioning as a being called love, then I stay connected to the active presence of love, and they do their behavior. Now, if they deny ownership for their behavior, then I would say that probably the next worksheet for the individual that has upset about that is going to be the upset about how you were beat up on and how you were punished when you didn't take responsibility for what you did in your world as a kid. And when you start forgiving that, then the person who is in denial about their behavior becomes an object of love and compassion rather than an object of ridicule and anger or sadness or grief or blame or whatever it is. So the person before us, let's say that what they did really has an impact on me, on my actuality, okay? So now, I do one of two things when this person does a behavior and denies it, a behavior that has an impact on my actuality. I stand as love, and I offer support, or I go into some sort of hostility or fear. I'm reminded of an event that happened. I was in Boston, at Unity Church in Boston. This goes back about 17 or 18 years ago. And we were doing an evening workshop. We took the intermission, and I went out to the van. I traveled in a motorhome at that point. I had my kids with me. I was in a motorhome, and we had just done several workshops, and we had a significant amount of cash in the van, and which we learned we don't do anymore. And we had some electronic equipment. And I went out at the intermission, and the door was broken open. And there was about, between the electronics and sound system and such, there was about $5,000 gone. And I can remember, we called the police, filed a report, hold the person accountable if they get caught. But what my main thought was in that event, and it wasn't that, that amount of equipment and that amount of money didn't have meaning to me, because that was significant at that point. But I can remember having a thought, I hope that whoever got it is somebody that can really use it and it benefits a family. And I came back in from the intermission, and people are, what happened? What's going on? The police had been there, et cetera, et cetera. We took a little longer intermission than normal. And I shared what had occurred. And I shared that, and everybody, please, if you would, hold the space that this person, if maybe it's a drug addict or alcoholic or something, that this event and the space that we hold brings this person to an awakening and awareness, and that they use that money and that equipment, they're probably going to turn around and sell it, but if they use it for some really good and valid purpose for themselves, their children, their families, whatever. And, several people afterward were like, are you crazy? But one really awesome result that came about as a result of that happening was that 3 years ago when Jeanie and I were out west, we were contacted by a psychologist who practices in the prison in, what town were we in? Down in southern Arizona. Name's not coming to mind, doesn't really matter. But anyway, this psychologist invited us in. Tucson, yeah, we were in Tucson. And this psychologist invited us in to work with about 100 kids. In Arizona, they put kids in prison at the age of 9. So we worked with a group of about 109 to 16-year-old kids in the prison, and it was as a result of that theft. And I'll tell you, you could have heard a pin drop with those kids, these tough kids, when they got what forgiveness meant. When they got, one of the things I did, and I kind of shook my finger at them, you guys are so tough, but I don't care how tough you are, there's somebody tougher. And you know what? I know the truth about you. How many here have ever held a newborn child? Jeanie asked that question, and several of them had, baby brothers and sisters. And what would you do? And so put that list on the board. So Jeanie had put that list on the board, and I kind of shook my finger at them and said, and I know who you really are, Mr. Tough Guy, Miss Tough Guy, gal. And I turned around to the board, and I pointed to the list. And I said, I know that's who you are. And I don't care what you're doing. You're adapting in a violent culture with violence, and it will destroy you. But if you reclaim your human life, things will be different. If you reclaim the active presence of love that you're designed to be, your life is going to change. And 100 kids in that room got it that day. And I'll tell you what, it was worth every penny that was stolen 17, 16 years earlier to get that invitation and going to work with those kids. Something awesome. My focus when that theft occurred was that this person would use something for their family. Well, I got to work with 109 to 16-year-old kids as a result of that event. So when you are a transformer of energy, you don't get lost in the insanities and terrors and the terrorizing and the hatred and the vengeance of the culture. You do something different. And you just keep cleaning up layer by layer the hostilities and fears that your bloodline has brainwashed you with until the only thing you do is stand in the space of the awesome presence of love that you are. Does that stimulate anything for anybody in the chat room?
Well, we're all connected, and if it makes sense, I agree. So apparently we're getting through to people. Someone says, I'm a tantric student, been practicing for 15 years. It's what I feel you're talking about, reaching for God's self through love and breath. Reaching it with your partner is what we're meant to be doing.
Yes. Yes. One of the key and important parts of relationship is that relationship that's truly based in two human beings having union as human beings, not having union as bodies, but as beings through their energetic systems called bodies, creates great awakening on the planet. So I'm in full agreement with you on that. And that's what we're here to do, is to create that awakening and inspire people to have the quality of relationship in their homes that might not be matched by the quality of relationship that was in your childhood home, in your family of origin. There may have been some crazy stuff happen. And if so, please go to our website, www.whyagain.com. And on the right side, you'll see a link that says Download Worksheets. It's about the 6th link down. If you would, click on that link and then download the first 4 links under that. That will give you the whole forgiveness story, the how-to of the process of forgiveness. And that's what we're here to support you in. It may seem unimaginable if this is your first introduction to the ideas, but literally you could go through every experience, including the worst experience you've ever had in your life, with the active presence of love available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, that doesn't seem humanly possible, and I'd offer that in our non-human state, which is often described as human. You're right, it's not possible. You have to claim your human life first. You have to remember who you are. Somebody held you coming out of the womb as this awesome newborn being. And there are tools, as strange as it may sound, with which to remove everything that never belonged. Sadly, when the teachings were taken out of the Aramaic, it was turned into religions. Rather than simply tools for life, rather than simply, well, here's how you reclaim your human beingness, it became something about loving your neighbor and, just all kinds of gobbledygook that has left people in more turmoil. I know we did a conference a couple of years ago, and they had a poster, and the poster was so accurate and so right on. And the title of the poster was, "So be world peace when there's peace among the world's religions." And we listened to how the condemnation, the fear, the games that are played in order for, and it's just business as usual for people who have to take the exclusive stand. I am the only owner of the truth. You must come to me. That's just business. That's all it is for the person who does that. And the teaching of love, the absolute presence of love, comes in many forms, in many expressions. And nobody has a corner on the market, though some who are so weak egotistically that they can't stand not being members of the exclusive club of the world will try to pretend that only what they have could possibly be true. And we're not asking you to believe anything. Well, nothing I'm saying is true, by the way. In the absolute infinite energy system, nothing I'm saying is true, but it will give you tools with which you will come to a direct experience of the absolute truth that you're designed to experience your life out of. That's what we're here to support you in. And it's awesome to have the opportunity to do that.
Well, we have somebody else in the chat room who says he's from Nairobi, Kenya, and he says he feels the love of his little 1-year-old child. And you're right, it's not a verb, and it's greater than life itself. And then we have somebody else who says...
Well, before you go to somebody else, Tim, I asked this gentleman from Kenya, now, what are you going to have to do to experience yourself as that? Because at the age of 1, when you were taken out of the womb, that's you. That's the awesome presence of love you are. And I challenge everybody who's listening. If you've been taught something different about yourself, different about the people around you, different about the world, what do you have to do in order to dump, that is, forgive, all of the garbage that's been fed into your mind, all of the fear-based insanity? What are you going to have to do to reclaim that essence that you are? Because that's who you still are. And that's our task, I'd offer. Excuse me, Tim, go ahead.
That's all right. We just, there's nothing more important than what you just said there. It's actually what the core of the tools in this work is about, is to remove everything that's less than love, and then we're not distracted, and we don't distract our conscious awareness from our source as love. There was someone else who said, forgiving others is an appreciation of their being, and understanding why they do what they do. Jeanie then said that we can pardon another, but true forgiveness is an internal process, as you've been talking about. It's the tool for removing those things that are less than love.
We're down to 3 minutes, but we do have a caller.
Okay, just for a second, though, it's so important to understand. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please never forgive anyone ever again for anything they're doing. Never forgive yourself ever again for anything you've done, because that's not forgiveness. Remember Karl Marx, change the meaning of words, you destroy a culture. So forgiveness has nothing to do with letting them off the hook or yourself for what's happened. If you have some form of hostility or fear, please engage in forgiveness. That is, please come to understand the tools for how to go inside yourself and remove what never belonged. Then you're back to the experience of your human life. Jeanie, let's invite our caller in and see if we've got a question that we can answer quickly enough in the couple of minutes we have left. And if not, then we'll just have to ask if they'll call back and take it up for tomorrow.
Yeah. Area code 517, you're on the air.
Hey, Michael. Hi, everybody. It's Rex.
Hey, Rex. Hey, sir.
Hey, great program. Good job, guys. I wanted to just acknowledge, all the wonderful work everyone's doing, just phenomenal, and also to remind anyone who's listening in my area that we're having our support group tonight.
Oh, awesome. So anybody that's in Lansing, Michigan, head on down to Lucy Street. What is it,
3426 Lucy Street with an IE, Southwest Lansing.
So 3426 Lucy Street in Southwest Lansing, 7 o'clock tonight. Rex Montague
awesome.
Hours doing MindShifters support. Please go play with him. Please come play with us. We're in Greensboro, North Carolina. We've got 4 more workshops this week, free open workshops each evening this week. And then we'll be doing MindShifters and Still Point Breathing on Saturday, then heading to Florida to tour Florida. So if you want us in your city in Florida, invite us. We'd love to come. Take these tools, please. Use them. Transform your world and have the best year yet of your eternal life. Bring a stranger to the show tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to MindShifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce, and his wife, Jeanie, who present that internal Aramaic process of forgiveness. Michael and Jeanie are here every Monday through Friday on Earth Angels Radio. For more on Michael and Jeanie, please visit www.whyagain.com. That's www.whyagain.com.